Hello, thank you for joining me. And this is a talk around Microsoft Authenticator. What is it? What can it be used for? Why should you use it? And the type of features that are available to it. Microsoft Authenticator app is an app on mobile devices that can be used to provide second-factor authentication for logins to various cloud services, although it's primarily used on Microsoft 365. The intention is to be able to have a second factor so that when a user enters their username and password, they get a prompt to provide this second factor. The Authenticator app allows users to either be able to accept a notification that appears on their phone or enter a code that shows up in the app. The app is available for iOS and Android devices, and we mainly use this. The main reason why we use this app is to protect against fraudulent logins. I think it's a stat that says that 99% of fraudulent logins can be prevented just by having MFA configured and set up for users, so that if somehow a user's password is discovered and somebody tries to log in a malicious way, if they're provided or prevented or shown with a second factor authentication, and that happens to be through the app, the likelihood is they're not going to have access to the app to be able to complete that login, and therefore the malicious person cannot gain access to the information within the tenant or wherever they're trying to log into. But it can also be used in additional scenarios whereby we can have it to validate our users when they're accessing certain information. Primarily, once again, focusing around Microsoft 365, we can prompt a second factor authentication using the app when users are accessing sensitive information, or if they're logging in from a completely separate country, or even if there's a kind of risk detected on their account. We can make sure that users are validated, and if they accept and they provide that second factor authentication, then we can say, okay, that user is who they say they are, and what the reason that they're trying to log in is genuine. So it protects against 99% of fraudulent logins, which is very high. And it's something that would be recommended, at least I recommend to any clients that I speak to, is something that should be enabled for all users. I'm not saying that everybody needs to have a kind of MFA prompt every time they log in, but users should be registered, and there should be a way for them to be able to provide the second factor authentication, so that in that specific scenario whereby we need to validate, we need to make sure you are who you say you are, that they're able to confirm that and accept the prompt or enter the code and move forward. Now, with Azure MFA, there are additional options to be able to provide that. We could use a text message and we could use a phone call, but for this particular talk, we're just focusing on the Authenticator app, and we'll be talking about other scenarios where it can be used, how we get users to register, and how do users set it up, and any additional features that may be available that are kind of worthwhile knowing about and getting configured. So as I mentioned, it can be used in various scenarios, and some of the important scenarios that are kind of use the Authenticator app for are mainly logins, and we can make sure that users are validated in certain scenarios. We can make sure that administrator accounts are always prompted for MFA, and they have to accept the notification on the phone. To be honest, that's the main reason, or the main kind of area that we would use the Authenticator app for. We can get users to register in various ways. So we can do this by using conditional access within Azure AD. So if we've got a scenario whereby a user must provide MFA, if they log in and authenticate and they meet the conditions for this specific scenario, they'll be prompted to register for MFA. Now, this has some drawbacks because it means that users will only be forced to register MFA in that particular scenario. So if you have a user that never kind of authenticates in that scenario, they're never going to really log in or register, for MFA and push the set up the Authenticator app. Ideally, we would look at using something like identity protection, whereby we can have an MFA registration policy, and that will be pushed out to all users, and it will force users to be able to register. Now, there are some accounts that you may not want to register for MFA. There might be service accounts, for instance, within the tenant, that if we have to have MFA every time they authenticate, then obviously there might be a service that won't run. So we can exclude those accounts from that policy to make sure that they don't get forced to register. Now, there's a new feature that's come out with the Authenticator app and within Azure AD at the moment, and it's a new campaign type feature. So this is where administrators can set up a kind of security information registration campaign, whereby we prompt users to register for Azure MFA, and we can kind of point them towards using the Authenticator app and getting that set up. Now, that new feature is quite welcome because there are some, or there's many clients that maybe don't have access to the identity protection policies to be able to use the MFA registration. So by having this campaign feature and being able to push that out to users to kind of give them a nudge to say register, I think that's always welcome. One way I like to try and do this and kind of get people to register the security information and set up the Authenticator app is by using it in conjunction with the self-service password reset. So we can use in Azure AD a service that's called combined security registration. And what this does is it when the user goes through the registration for their security information, they set up whatever method they're going to use for that second factor authentication. They do it for MFA for when they're prompted for authentication, but they also do it for the password reset feature. And the benefit of that is not only do we register for them both and they use just the one form of second factor authentication to be able to validate who they are, but with self-service password reset, we can actually enforce all users to register for that service, meaning that the first time they log in or the next time they log in, they have to register their security information. When they register it, they've got the app, or they've got their phone number, however, whatever it might be, configured, so that it can be used for MFA as well as password reset. So that's a good feature to use for that, and that campaign feature I think is new and will be welcome to be able to use that and kind of nudge people that maybe haven't registered yet for whatever reason, but also try and force people to do so. So for users to actually set up the app is relatively straightforward. So when they come to register their security information, they can choose what method they want to register. So they can choose the Authenticator app, and they can either choose it as a notification or they can choose it as a code that they wish to use. Either way, the users are provided with a QR code that they scan. So within the app, which they can download through the iOS or the Android app stores. They download the app, they can add a new account, they then scan the QR code. That kind of does most of the configuration in the background for you. Once that's scanned, you're then you're then asked to test the Authenticator app, and users will either get a notification or they'll be given the code that they have to enter to validate that that's all working. Once that's done, the security information is registered and they are then set up and ready to go with the Authenticator app. Now, it's all straightforward for users to be able to do that. It's quick and easy, and we can get them registered. As I said before, it doesn't mean that they are prompted for MFA and have to use it every login, but we can make sure that it's used for various different scenarios and kind of protecting users so that if a username and password is somehow gained by a malicious attacker, they still need the MFA to be able to log in as especially in certain scenarios. Some additional features that we can use the Authenticator app for and the Azure MFA service for. So, with the Authenticator app, it can be used for various accounts. So users don't have just one account added onto there. Every account that you might use that has that would use Azure MFA can be added, and you get prompted for each one. And when the prompt comes up, it will show you which account you're being asked to authenticate and validate for, so that you can approve or decline that or enter the code, etc. One of the important things that I always try and push organizations to do is if we've got MFA configured properly, that when a user gets a prompt on their phone, if they actually hit the decline of that, then it will go through and it will be logged as a fraudulent login, at which point the account itself can be protected. It may be blocked. We could prompt users to reset their passwords, once again requires Azure MFA, and we can help kind of automatically protect that account if the users see a login that they themselves have not initiated. And it's a good way to be able to do that automatically without having administrators have to get involved, or the user themselves have to, if they decline it, the next time they log in, it asks them to reset the password. They can go through the process using the Authenticator app as the second factor, reset their password, and then gain access themselves. Protects the account, does it automatically, and administrators don't necessarily need to get involved. We can use it for passwordless authentication as well. So this is something that I know Microsoft are pushing heavily, and we're trying to push heavily here at Visual as well, is to use passwordless authentication. It's something that I use myself when I log in using my my Visual to my Visual account. So when I log in, it could be through a browser or through an app, whatever it might be. I'm actually presented with a prompt that says, enter the code that is shown on screen. So instead of me entering my password every time, when I authenticate, I get provided with a number on screen, and I have to enter that into the app. Now, that's a relatively new feature. It used to be that you would get a choice of 3 numbers that you would then choose the number that is come up. I mean, I suppose there is a 33% chance that somebody that might be malicious might be able to choose the right number. But the idea is that with that, now you have to enter the number. It's just a bit more of a streamlined way of being able to make sure that that authentication attempt is valid, and it just means I don't have to use my password anymore. I actually don't know what my password is on my original account anymore. I don't need to know what that is. Every time I authenticate, I just need to enter a code on the phone, and then I just scan my facial ID, and it authenticates and validates me. And a new feature that's come out recently as well, just add some additional context to those logins. If somebody gets a prompt for MFA, we can introduce GPS-based information on that prompt. So it will showcase where that authentication request has come from. So if the user receives a prompt and it comes up and it shows that that's coming from Australia, when they live in the UK and it shouldn't be coming from that location, gives them a bit more context around it, and they can make sure that they decline it and realize that that is not something that is happening. So that's just some of the features that I think are well worth talking about and getting configured for the Authenticator app, as well as with the Azure MFA. It's anytime I do an identity-based engagement with any of my clients, MFA is always talked about. It's always something we recommend getting configured and making sure that all users are registered. And then we talk about the ways and the scenarios in which this should be used properly. Doesn't need to have an MFA prompt on every login. But there are certain scenarios whereby an MFA prompt using the Authenticator app is recommended, and it's something that we can discuss, and we can absolutely help configure the service and make sure that it's set up in the right way. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions on the Authenticator app and wish to ask, then please do get in touch. My email is matthewc@visual.com. Thank you for listening.